My name is Katherine Morris. I am the academic director of something called Nuclear Waste Services Research Support Office. We're really keen to reach out to the academic community, and I'll just spend 2 or 3 minutes telling people what the RSO is, and then David will talk a little bit more about their mission and their research requirements. On the screen now, please do take a moment if you've not joined up to our newsletter. That will allow you to engage with this community on the spirally, slightly Squid Game photograph that we've got of our annual conference that was in Bristol in 2025, so that you can sign up to our newsletter and join the community and engage in a wide range of events, all the way from social sciences through to plutonium waste disposal. Okay. So what is the Nuclear Waste Services Research Support Office? It was set up in 2020 to harness UK capability in underpinning research. That is academic research, and it's about research and innovation to support nuclear waste services research requirements, underpinning research requirements. The scope in 2019, when we wrote the tender document, was with an organisation called Radioactive Waste Management, and it was first focused in and around the deep geological disposal facility that David, I'm sure, will talk about. Then in the early 2020s, the organisation changed to Nuclear Waste Services with a wider our research underpinning research requirement, and we're there to support the research and development underpinning research and development needs that their programmes require. It's led by Manchester. We've got a lot of academics in Manchester closely engaged with the RSO, and involves over 20 universities across the UK. Our structure is in this little rather badly drawn diagram, because obviously I drew it, you can tell that. We have 3 topic areas: environment, materials, and engineering. The engineering is going to come online in the next 6 to 12 months. Environment and materials are active at the moment, and we have academic leads coordinating activities in those areas, and geosciences lives in that environment blob. And then we've got other things, because actually it transpires that a deep geological disposal facility requires a whole range of academic disciplines, from environmental chemistry to social sciences to material science. So we have a whole host of activities in that area to develop that multidisciplinarity. What have we got? Our Squid Game photo showed a lot of people. We had over 160 people at our most recent 2025 conference. We have over 60 researchers, over 60 academics, and over 20 subject matter experts that we've brought into this environment since 2020, doing radioactive waste disposal research. That has real reach for academics into subject matter experts within nuclear waste services, who can frame their research challenges, and that you can understand their challenges, problems, and work with them to develop new research. And it's pretty clear that the research that the RSO is doing has impact. It's applied to nuclear waste services research and development programme. Nuclear Waste Services can provide support to studentships and proposals. We have bursary students in the RSO. We have affiliated students in the RSO. We have UKRI Fellows and Royal Academy of Engineering Fellows and Royal Society Fellows who live in universities, have been supported by the RSO, and have permanent jobs now. So again, cascading into that research in and around NWS's research priorities. And they can also support with UKRI proposals, and that conversation can be started through the RSO. This image shows approximately 30 people in what's called the NERC NWS GSA programme. That's a large consortium grant that we're running at the moment in the UK, involving subject matter experts in NWS and academics and researchers in academia. I'll finish there and hand over to Kevin to hand over to David.
Thanks, Kath. That's a good overview. Right, I'm going to try and make sure I can share the right screen, the right talk. That'd be useful, wouldn't it? So I can just check that is. Sorry about this. Is that showing up okay? Yeah, okay. So I'm really pleased to welcome David Schofield. I'll let him introduce himself. I know he's been in post not too long, has got a long and distinguished career before that. So I'll hand over to David to give us his talk. Sorry. Lack of technology.
Brilliant. The kind of issues resolved. Right. Hello, everybody in the room, and hello, everybody on the line. Thank you for inviting me along today. So, as Kevin suggested, I have been at NWS as the Chief Geologist for, I think, about 7 months now. Prior to that, I was at the British Geological Survey for something like 27 years. I've had quite a diverse career as a geologist, really starting off as a mapping geologist in central Wales, but spending a lot of my career looking at high-grade metamorphic and igneous terrains around the world, and then moving into a few more kind of more strategic roles after that. Anyhow, I'm now at NWS. I have worked in quite a few different nuclear sector programs over the years, including external hazards for most of the UK's nuclear new build projects and parts of the NWS program as well, which I'll talk to a bit first. So the title of my talk today, the role of geoscience in developing a GDF. I think the clue is in the title, really. A geological disposal facility. What's the role of geoscience? I don't think you can really build things in the ground without understanding the volume that you're going to put them in and understanding something about the geology. I'm going to try and talk a bit about what that means for nuclear waste services very, very briefly. Please feel free to ask me more questions later on, based mostly on the things that I know a bit about. You know, NWS is a very diverse program, and I'll talk to you about the bits that I'm more familiar with. I've put this kind of summary statement in there as well, which I'll read out now, but I'm going to sort of just refresh it at the end just to see if it makes any sense. So current policy requires geological disposal of higher activity radioactive waste. So what we do in NWS is governed by policy. Geoscience, what we're all engaged in here, provides the evidence base to enable construction and operation of a facility, so that's something about engineering and constructability, and for assuring the long-term passive safety function of isolation and containment. Going to talk a bit more about those, but that's really where geology fits in. Sorry, everybody, more technical issues. Yes, there we go. Right, thank you very much. A bit of background, because we can't really do this without a bit of background to where we are in the UK. Really, the problem is the UK's had one of the longest nuclear sectors in the world, more than 70 years. And over that time, it's developed quite a large and complex inventory of radioactive waste through power generation, medicine, defence, industry, research, etc. That material is located at a number of sites across the UK. And there have been, to date, a number of attempts at finding a solution to disposing of those wastes. I'm not going to talk about those today. That would be several hours of debate just to get into that subject completely. However, importantly, the last sort of effort ended in 2013. A new round of policy development took place. And currently what Nuclear Waste Services does now is it works against a policy regime that was finalised in 2018. So it's relatively recent. So Nuclear Waste Services is a component body of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, which is a non-departmental public body created through the Energy Act of 2004. Importantly, it actually owns many of the nuclear sites in the UK, civil nuclear sites, owns the liabilities of those and manages them on behalf of the public. Within that, Nuclear Waste Services has a role for implementing the policy on the disposal of higher activity radioactive waste. That's what we do. So very, very briefly, some things about the policies. The diagram on the left of the screen, I had to check that, implementing geological disposal. That's the sort of the white paper that outlines the framework in which we work. Within that, it was agreed that geological disposal of radioactive waste was going to be the route that the UK took. That's based on international best practice and the advice of the UK's independent committee, the Committee of Radioactive Waste Management. Since that was produced in 2014, the forerunner, the predecessor to NWS, which was Radioactive Waste Management, started doing some of the preparatory work. The paper that you see in the middle of there, Geological Disposal, National Geological Screening. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but RWM immediately did some of the preparatory work to start implementing it. The final documents on the right, implementing geological disposal, working with communities. That's the final policy paper. And you can see within that, one of the things that's important is communities. So it's important to understand that the geological disposal facility is only going to be built where there is both a suitable geology and a willing community. So it's a collaborative effort, basically. So what is a GDF, a geological disposal facility? Well, it's effectively a series of tunnels and shafts under the ground between about 200 and 1,000 meters deep. Why those depths? Well, the minus 200 meters below ground level is to give some security against intrusion by future natural processes such as glaciations. Are you going to exhume your GDF in the future? Hopefully not. And the minus 1,000 meters is really about what's sort of feasible and practical from an engineering perspective. So we have the depth range in which we want to build it. It's also at that depth, so hopefully below aquifers, which is important. I'll come on to why. The key principles of what it has to do: isolate radioactive materials from the surface, so keep it out of the way, contain radionuclides until such times as the hazard has decayed, and effectively be passive. So after it's closed up and we walk away, it doesn't require any human interaction to keep it functioning. So we walk away and forget about it once it's full. So that is the internationally accepted best solution, and that's the one that the UK is trying to follow. How does it work? Well, we have a thing called the multi-barrier approach. So that there's obviously a lot of work done on the engineered barriers, and some of you, certainly people at Manchester, are very heavily involved in the development of those engineered barriers, and many of you online do the RSO. That's some of the work that you will be doing. So that's talking about how the waste are treated, how they're packaged, how they're emplaced in the underground facility, you know, how they're backfilled around it, and how all those materials interact to provide containment and isolation. But outside of that is the geological environment, okay? And that's the other part that has to also provide isolation and containment. It's assumed that over the period of time that this material has to decay, so a couple of 100,000 years or more or thereabouts, that the engineered barriers are not going to stay completely as they are the day that they were built. So the relationship with the geological environment is extremely important. Okay, let's talk a bit about suitable host rocks. So these are the host rocks that we might think about at 200 meters and 1,000 meters below ground level. They have to do a function of providing a stable environment through which fluids move at a very slow rate if they move at all, and that, you know, fluid return times to the surface environment are very, very low, both at the present time, but also what we forecast they will do in the future as well, which is quite important. There are three sort of categories of host rocks. Again, they were laid out in that initial white paper that I showed you earlier, again, based on international best practice. We'd call those higher strength rocks, lower strength sedimentary rocks, and evaporite rocks. And I'm just going to call them HSR for higher strength rocks, LSSR for sedimentary rocks, and evaporites, just because it's less of a mouthful. An example of an HSR might be something like granite. So we're mostly talking about crystalline, igneous, and metamorphic rocks, okay, that are generally impermeable, or no, not completely. One of the things that might let them down is the presence and, you know, connectivity of fractures. So understanding the properties of those kinds of features is quite important in an HSR environment. Lower strength sedimentary rocks, LSSR, might include clay-rich rocks. Here, these are generally impermeable, but they might have slow diffusion through them, needs to be understood, and they may have fractures that provide sort of advective pathways. One of the things about clay minerals, though, is that they have a potential for being self-sealing if they fracture. So they can heal over those fractures, providing a generally quite low permeability environment. The third one, evaporite, again, it's an impermeable material, but understanding things like fractures in chemical environment is quite important. Right. I'm going to start a bit earlier on in the process and talk a bit about National Geological Screening. Why? Because I know quite a lot about it, because I had to deliver quite a lot of it. So, you know, talk to your strengths, I think. So after the policy was produced, what NWS tries to do is to work with communities and sort of enable communities to make decisions for themselves about whether they're going to enter into a discussion about hosting a geological disposal facility. In order to do that, we've had to provide them information on the geology of their areas that helps them make those decisions. So the National Geological Screening is not screening in the sense that it's not exploring for somewhere to put a geological disposal facility. It's actually about providing some information of places that might be useful that communities can start thinking about. The methodology is laid out in this document here, the detailed technical instructions. You can see this online. If you just Google National Geological Screening, you'll find that. I was working at the British Geological Survey at the time, and effectively this document was written by BGS and experts from radioactive waste management at that time, which lays out the methodology for looking at England and Wales as part of the screening process. We looked at these criteria that are listed in this table here. So rock type, so distribution of those potential host rock types and something about their properties. Rock structure, the distribution of highly folded and fractured zones where faults might be that might actually damage sort of a potential containment. Groundwater, the presence of aquifers, the presence of features that might be isolating shallow groundwater systems that might be aquifers from deeper groundwater systems. Locations of features likely to permit rapid flow of groundwater to the surface. It could again be karst, it could be fractures, faults. Groundwater age and chemical composition, again, things that tell us something about the rate at which groundwater might return to the surface and the sort of chemical environment that we want to put our wastes into. Natural processes. So this is about, you know, in a very uniformitarian sense, understanding things that have gone on in the past and being able to try and forecast what might happen in the future. So things like patterns of seismicity. The UK is a low seismicity area at the moment. Will it remain so in the future in the next couple of 100,000 years? What's the distribution of earthquakes look like? How is that likely to affect a geological disposal facility? The extent of past glaciations, understanding the level of glacial erosion and the effect of permafrost, perhaps the two most important things, comparing that against climate models so that you get a sense of when glaciations might be and what their impact might be. Think about resources. So this is talking about potential for human intrusion into a GDM. So you imagine you have your geological disposal facility, you've closed it, you've walked away, you've thrown away the key, but somebody wants to come and mine something that's underneath it. They've forgotten where it is. Are they going to drill a borehole straight through the middle of it? So the idea about doing this is to basically look for areas where that is, on our current understanding, less likely to happen, but also to look at areas where there aren't already lots of boreholes, because where you've drilled boreholes, you've already got some rapid pathways for moving groundwaters back to the surface. So things about understanding where resources are, where mining's happened, and where it might happen in the future. So the bit that I did while working with BGS was to actually work on the rock type part of it. So to understand the distribution of potential host rocks. So what we did was we took the UK's, well, England and Wales's lithostratigraphy at a formation level, and we classified it as to what we thought was going to be an LSSR, an HSR, or evaporite within that formation as a significant component. And we did that just based on what was available in the published literature. Everything that we looked at was published. Everything that we've looked at is available to the public. So there's no great literature. So that's sort of quite a limitation in this. You know, everything could be better if you look at more sources, but for this, the public had to be able to repeat it for themselves, should they wish to. So having done that classification, we needed to apply it on a UK-wide basis. So this is BGS's UK 3D fence diagram. So as you can see, it's a fence diagram of the United Kingdom. It's not like if you were making a petroleum 3D model, which you would do it from seismic and boreholes, then you would probably apply an algorithm. This is actually looking, this is a group of geologists looking at all the available information, effectively drawing these cross sections. So yes, they do include all that data, but they include everything else that a geologist could see. So that sort of limits the kind of the accuracy and the precision and what you're actually looking at. However, it is the only thing for the whole of the UK that's available to you. So this is what had to be used. So we took that classification and we applied it to the stratigraphy that's illustrated in this model here. So and this is an example, I think this is from the Wessex Basin. The top shows you what a cross section from that model looks like. The one below that shows coloured up potential LSSR in grey, and in red there is no potential host rock. So the idea was then to take that and turn it into a map that is consumable by the public. And they want to see the distribution of those materials, those grey materials, at between 200 and 1,000 meters depth. So what the next step was to build some surfaces based on these cross sections, then to intersect them with a top surface at -200 and a bottom surface at -1,000 to come up with some areas, then project them back onto the surface. So a bit of sort of modelling activity. And what you end up with is something that looks a bit like this. And this is Manchester in the middle of this diagram. So this is the northwest of England, showing you those three potential host rock types at -200 and -1,000 meters below ground level. And that ground level is not Ordnance Survey 0. That is a special datum that was produced, again, to cut between the bottoms of river distributaries so that there wouldn't be any human intrusion from there. So even the datum is built specific for this programme. As you can see, Manchester doesn't necessarily have any potential host rock sitting right underneath it. Just as a couple of other examples, so this is some of the information from the resource exercise. The diagram on the left shows you the distribution of hydrocarbon licence blocks, mineral ore fields, where there are deep boreholes and wells, again in this area. And the diagram on the right shows you basically coal resources from the area. Again, you can see that's quite a crowded resource region around here. You might think twice about putting a GDF in this kind of space. This information was then taken and some more sort of generalized consumable maps and accounts produced and put online that communities could look at. So if you were to then look at National Geological Screening online, it would take you to a government website and you'll see some things that are based on this. But this technical information, this stayed with the BGS. So if you wanted to see this, you just look on the BGS website and you can see all this detailed information from which the more generalized communication stuff was taken. That was made available to the public. Discussions with communities started happening. And there are a number of communities that we're working with at the moment. And through that discussion and through consideration of what we call siting factors, we were able to kind of make a way forward with some of these communities. Siting factors include safety and security. So safety is where isolation and containment fit in. Security is more about the nuclear materials themselves. Community benefits, protecting the environment, engineering feasibility, transport, how can you transport this material to the particular community that you're talking to, and value for money. So we're going to talk about what really fits into that safety area of this diagram. So some of the communities that we're working with are in Cumbria. And so the areas that we're talking to them about are actually offshore, off the Cumbria coast. So what we would call the inshore area. So this is by agreement with them. They were interested in thinking about developing a geological disposal facility out at sea. And so this is the area that we've looked at with them, based on advice from us as well. So this shows you the kind of information that we've looked at for the next step. So the next step after this broad screening process is to develop an understanding of the geology based on available information. And as you can see, this area it's an area of hydrocarbon exploration and production. What you can see on here in sort of grey lines are legacy 2D seismic data. In black dots, those are wells. There's a sort of a maroon square towards the bottom, which is a legacy 3D seismic cube. And then sort of an orange polygon, that is a 3D seismic cube acquired by NWS in 2022. So we did acquire some new data. But what we didn't do is any intrusive investigations. Why not? Again, because we didn't want to drill holes through a potential volume where we might want to put a GDF. So that's sort of data that we've looked at initially. There's an example of a seismic line across the middle of that block of 3D seismic. Just see if I can remove that. And in this area, we've got some Mersey mudstone group. It's at the right sort of depth. Mersey mudstone group contains both mud-rich rocks and it contains halite units. So there is potential in that area for a volume of rock that might host a geological disposal facility. So on the back of that, further investigations have to take place to understand what that volume might look like. See, that cross section that you looked at before, it neatly kind of skirts around areas where there are faults. You can see in this view, you can see some faults that have been imaged, seismic scale faults, but we're able to sort of work out where some of those larger faults are. We know the gross thickness of the units that we're looking at, the depth at which they're present. So we can make a rough assessment of whether there is a feasible volume in there. As well as doing that, we have to think about the functionality. We know, for instance, the Mersey mudstone is quite a heterogeneous formation. So we've been looking at the legacy core information to be able to understand the heterogeneity and understand what that heterogeneity might mean in terms of safety function. So if you've got, for instance, a Mersey mudstone with thin sandstones and thin siltstones, while the mudstone itself might be relatively impermeable or have quite slow diffusion through it, the sandstones might be completely opposite. So we kind of need to understand the distribution of those, what their length scales are, what their spacing is, and what their overall impact on the safety properties might be. I mean, that's where I think the next talk is going to be really interesting because it's about how you look at those things at all kinds of different scales, which is very important. As well as doing that, we're again looking at the legacy data. We've been looking at legacy drill cuttings. We've been looking at legacy geophysical logs, all to get an understanding of what the basic characteristics might be in our volume so that we can make a case for doing further work. And I guess that's what this is all about, making a case for doing further work. Onshore animals, the final bit, if you actually want to see this stuff in 3 dimensions, it's very hard to see under the sea, but you can actually look at onshore analogs to get a feel for what some of those heterogeneities might look like and how they might function, how they might operate, what faults might look like, what fractures. They're not in the same basin as the area that we're looking at, but I think it's important information to help build a picture of what the geology might be doing. So having, I said, making a case for doing further investigations. What we have to do to get consent to do further investigations is demonstrate that we know enough about the geology as it stands at the moment to ask the right questions, and also to know enough that we're not actually going to drill holes through the bit that we want to build a GDF in. So we have to sort of work around the edges of where we want to put the GDF, but we have to learn enough to try and forecast what's in that volume. And an important part of that is the research and development that helps us understand heterogeneity, helps us understand safety performance, so that we've got these multiple lines of evidence that underpin our understanding of the safety. Our research and development program is quite broad, and I'm just going to skirt over it because I know that I'm sort of running out of time. But it falls into a number of sort of broad topics, illustrated on this slide. Operational readiness. So these are the things that we need to know how to do to make everything work and to answer the questions we want to answer. So that includes knowing if we've got the right geophysical, geochemical monitoring techniques. So there's something about technique development. Have we got the facilities in the UK or in Europe to be able to do all the work that we need to do? So understanding facility development, things about digital transformation. Are we digitally transformed enough to do this job to the best of our capability? So, data analysis, modeling capability, building digital twins should be the case, using AI. So are we digitally transformed? I talked a little bit, very, very briefly, about future evolution. So that's, again, in itself is a kind of research topic. Understanding the potential for human intrusion, what mining might happen, what other things people might do. Co-location is important in this. So this is really thinking about what happens if somebody wants to do a CCS project in the vicinity. It's probably not going to be in the same formation, but what, for instance, would the pressure perturbation make on monitoring activities, or what happens for hydrogen storage or underground energy storage, such as compressed air energy storage or things like that. So these sort of co-locations, is there an impact of that? Are there short-term changes, THMC kind of changes that we need to understand? What's the impact of long-term climate impact changes? You know, periglacial process, glacial erosion. So there's a whole piece about future evolution that's quite important. Mineralogy, understanding mineralogy so that we can, you know, understand the kind of reactions that are going to happen once radionuclides get into this area. So diagenetic process, mineralogy, radionuclide transport, all important. Advective pathways, so largely talking about fractures. What's the distribution of fractures? How do they interconnect together? How are they mineralized? What are the transport properties for gas and water within that? Fluid processes, understanding groundwater properties, solute transport, dating and fingerprinting. Again, trying to get a picture of what sort of reactive state of those groundwaters will be and kind of how quickly they can get back to surface. Geomechanics, stress and anisotropy lithology. Again, important to be able to forecast the long-term stress evolution of an engineered volume under the ground, not just from building it, but for also understanding how it's going to evolve in the future and how it actually might degrade over time. These are all wrapped around by basic understanding of the geology, basin process, understanding our analogues, understanding depositional process, you know, basin analysis, burial inversion, all the rest of it, because that provides us the framework in which we can actually forecast it into our volume. So that's all quite important. Finally, I'm just going to look at some site-specific challenges, trying to put that in context. It's fundamentally a multi-scalar problem. We're going to hear a bit more about that in a minute. From, you know, microscale to core scale to outcrop to formation to basin. We need to understand the geology of all of this to be able to be confident in how the safety function is going to work. Some of the problems associated with the Mersey Mudstone group include things like really getting to grips with what the multi-scale heterogeneity means for safety. Understanding the, you know, we know that we've got some high salinity, sulfur-rich pore waters, understanding how they're going to affect the kind of diffusive properties and interactions with the engineered barriers. We've got complex hydromechanical chemical processes. We have the mechanical features of the rocks, of brittleness. What was that going to do with faulting and fracturing? These are not, as mudstones go, these are probably on the more deeply buried end of the spectrum compared to other international analogues. So we're looking at physical properties that are quite different from our colleagues in France and Switzerland, for instance. Multi-scale, multi-phase gas water flow processes, drilling, sample preservation. Mersey Mudstone is not easy stuff to recover core from. So we need to think about how we actually recover material that's good enough to do all the tests that we actually need to do to ensure safety. Understanding inshore hydrogeology, there's a lot known from the petroleum sector, although perhaps the questions that the petroleum industry are asking is different from the ones that we need to ask with this. And also things about structure and active tectonics. Right, there we go. That is kind of it. I'm just going to come back to my first slide again. Hopefully I've sort of covered out most of these things in a very whistle-stop kind of way. The role of geoscience in developing a GDF. Current policy, mentioned a bit about that, requires geological disposal of higher activity radioactive waste. And that obviously drives a lot of questions about how the geology is going to actually provide safety for those wastes. But what it does do is it provides the evidence base that enables construction and operation of a facility. It's going to take decades to actually build this and fill it and close it. And for showing the long-term passive safety functions of isolation and containment. You know, and that's where really understanding how perturbations and how doing things with rocks at depth, chemically, physically, you know, can change those two features. Right, I think I've run out of things to say now. I'm going to stop. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, David. Really interesting. Lots to go out there. Are we logged on? Are you logged on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions in the room. You can hang, obviously, you can grab David afterwards. There's about 50 people online. So what we'll do is we'll have a couple of quick questions, and then any couple of questions online, Kath will read them out, and then we'll move on. Okay. Any questions for David in the room? Stunned.
It's because they know I'll be here afterwards.
Okay. Do you have any online then?
I've got one question online
Okay.
that I'm bringing over so
Okay,
David can read it out.
There seem to be thin-skinned contractional wrinkles in the lower Mersey Mudstone group. Is there a significant risk of creep on the time scale of the GDF? Will there be a thermal effect on the GDF? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question. So I mean, what I would say is that there is going to be some reprocessing of the seismic data to actually start looking at some of these more detailed issues than the ones that we've perhaps already answered. You know, so far we've looked at sort of general volumes and general lithologies, and we've identified some significant, quite more detailed things that need some further looking at.
Speak up. Really, really interesting presentation. I suppose it's really clear how important geological geoscience knowledge will be to finding the right location for the GDF. And you have explained all, I guess, the different categories of knowledge that are required. But I was wondering if you could comment on, you know, I guess over the next sort of, 10 years, so while you're developing that or finding the location, working with your community, what the role of that sort of geological information you're going to need, or how you're going to be collecting and developing that knowledge to come up with, I guess, a safety case or risk assessment for that. I mean, can you give us any idea of how's that going to work? And I guess how people in this room could contribute to that.
I will do my best to help you out with that. So the next kind of, I didn't put a slide in showing our timeline. That might have been useful to help answer your question, but a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is aimed towards the consenting process. So we have to get development consent orders, and that they're managed by the Environment Agency, who's our regulator in this case. Much of our work at the moment and that is in itself a tiered exercise, and much of our site characterization work at the moment is aimed towards the first phase of that consenting process. That first phase of consenting will give us permission to go ahead and drill some boreholes, so do some intrusive investigations. And so as part of that, we have to, based on the information that we already have, so based on publicly available information, we have to be able to demonstrate that we have an understanding of the geology, an understanding there is a potential volume that we could work with, an understanding of some of the basic geological characteristics to convince the regulator that we know enough to proceed. And within that, we have to basically consist them that we're not going to sterilize our own patch by doing intrusive investigations. So much of the work that we're doing at the moment is focused on getting to that stage of being able to drill some boreholes. Once we've then recovered some material from some boreholes, that's when really getting under the skin of how we forecast isolation and containment attributes might be. So that's probably, I would predict that probably all the work that the research sector and the university sector is doing at the moment, that's when all that is going to come to bear. As when we actually need to look at some Mercia muds and say, well, what do we know about diffusion in Mercia mudstone? Right. And how does that add into the safety case? At the moment, I think the key thing is to ensure that we've got the tools and techniques available for when that material is there.
So it's very much, so at this stage, it's very much just general underpinning knowledge that's really required. Yeah. And when you get to that stage where you've got more standards, that's really you get much more specific, which maybe
that's going to be, I mean, yeah, I mean, and I would say that that's not going to happen before 2030. That's it's those kind of timescales, I think, and even then, that's going to, what drilling's like. That might slip beyond that. I mean, actually, because in the environments that we're drilling, if you think about, you've got to recover high quality core in an inshore area, so in relatively shallow water, but you're still in water. So you can't go and hire a petroleum rig because you'd have to rebuild it to come and work in this kind of shallow water. Also, you need to use the kind of drilling technology that perhaps you're more familiar with on shore. So it's not an off-the-shelf drilling solution. So it's going to take a bit of a while to, procure and design that to start with. So it's actually quite an exciting time to be doing something which is actually pretty unique.
So there'll be quite a lot of new and innovative.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are going to be problems that none of us have thought about that are going to need solving, and they're going to need solving quickly, I think. Yeah.
You're online, Kath, or?
There is not.
Okay, well, the update's got to start, so we've got to thank David again for his talk. Very interesting being in meetings nowadays when 2040s, 2050s are on timelines. Used to that, really. So, right, okay, so tradition is that we don't always give, as well as having people who are established, or like me, old, we have young researchers giving talks as well. And so Ginia is working on the GSA program. It's a postdoc working on the GSA program, which was mentioned by Kath, which is a NERC, NWS funded big research project on lower strength sedimentary rocks. Going to give us a bit of a flavour of some of this multi-scale imaging work that you've been doing. So I'll let you deal with the
Technical stuff, yeah.
So I did my PhD study on the diagenesis of the mudstone at the University of Manchester, and then I started my first postdoc working on the aquifer thermal energy storage on sandstone. And then I moved back to the mudstone and worked on this geoscience project. So, okay. Yes. So as David mentioned, so we rely on both the engineered and natural rocks to for the safe disposal, but these rocks are quite heterogeneous. So, for example, when we look at here, so there are some fracture zones. So that could be a fast pathway for the radionuclide transportation, and in other areas we can see a lot of the clay minerals might tightly bind the radionuclide. So this variability is control how the radionuclides move or get trapped. So in that case, to long-term predict their behavior, we need to understand their properties across the multiple scales. So that is where a multi-imaging approach comes in. So when we look at here, it's at 10 meter to 1,000 meters at the repository scale. So we can use the geophysical logging to look at the faults and the regional fascias to identify their for the site selections.
You need to talk in the computer.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Online.
I can see it. Okay, and then we move to the millimeter scales. We use the CT to look at the core image. So at this scale, we can look at the bindings, fractures, or laminations to identify the preferential flow pathways and also guide the engineered barrier design. And then we move to the macro scale. So we use macro CTs to look at the macro bindings and the macro fractures, and also the reactive surface areas, which affect the diffusion and the transportation. And when we zoom in on the nanoscale, we can look at the nanopore connectivities and also the clay planes, so which is critical for us to capture the mechanism of the radionuclide binding. So, but in mind, there are variable techniques so we can achieve this multi-scale imaging, but as our resolution increases, our sample size or field of the view shrinks. So in this case, we need to use this approach to identify the scale where the measurement becomes representative. So we need to select the representative elements volume to perform our experiment. So there are variable techniques so we use a combination of the techniques to achieve this. We use the CT or macro CT at the large scales and move to the macro CT and nano CT and also nano IR for the small scales identification. But in the lab, we can use these techniques to perform the long-term experiment, but they are limited to the speed and also the resolution. So this is the reason why we use synchrone-based facilities to perform the environment, so it can allow us achieve a high resolution within just down to 0.5 microns in just 10 minutes. But why is fast scanning important? Because many crucial processes like sorption, precipitation happen in minutes. So capture these early time processes is quite important for us to understand if the radionuclide is immobilized or retains mobile. So let's walk through an example from the core to pore characterization. So we are seeing here is a measurement stone from an offshore borehole. So we can look at the core image here. So that is quite a heterogeneous. So on this right side, so there is massive blocks and the blocky mudstones, and here is finely laminated mudstones. We can see the laminations and also the fractures. They are quite important for us to identify the seeding units. And also we can see this is the interbedded dark gray layers, and also the light gray layers. So they are differ in the mineral compositions and also affect their permeability and porosity properties. And then when we zoom into the millimeter scale, we look at the core samples, we can see there are some the clay-rich bites here. So this is clay-rich mudstone. So it shows more potential for the sorption due to the presence of these clay-rich layers compared to the unlaminated carbon-rich mudstone. But the key thing is the presence of the carbonate in the carbonate-rich mudstone can also affect the radionuclide mobility because it can buffer the pH, change the geochemical conditions in the groundwater. And also, even within a core samples, and the mineralogy can change a lot. So I divided this sample in two parts, the top and bottom parts. And I did the quantification on these minerals. So we can see here, the bottom part has more clay minerals in the top part. And also, correspondingly, it contains more granular minerals. It's less granular, so the top part has more granular minerals than the bottom part. So that is crucial for us to identify which is the preferential site for the radionuclide salt. And when after look at the mineral distribution at this scale, so I start identifying the specific minerals and their roles. For example, the pyrite, which is redox reactive minerals. So it can absorb the radionuclides or reduce the technetium-7 to technetium-4. So it's quite important to understand its surface and the surface area and the roughness, so it can tell us where the radionuclide absorbed more. And also, the 3D images can tell us about the pore geometries. So when we look at these animations, we see there is a, wait, just wait for a moment, sorry. We can see there is a pore here, here. We can see there is a pore within the carbonate, but actually it might actually be an intermineral pore instead of the individual pore in a mineral. It could be a K transport pathway for the radionuclide. But the key thing at this scale, we can't still really see the nanopore network, which is quite important. So this is, we turn to using the FABE and the SE and the TM to look at the pore distribution. So we zoom in the interested area and say this, there are some pores within the clay minerals and also some pores between the granular minerals. So they are governed the diffusion, which is dominant mechanism for the in the low permeability mudstone. And so using this, so by quantifying their size, shape, and also these pore distributions, we can fit the porosity, permeability, and also their distributions into the reactive transport modeling. So to predict the long-term radionuclide behavior. This is just an example. This is not the real modeling, but we can use it for the long-term behavior predictions. So the key things now, we use this multi-imaging approach to understand our host rocks. But when a GDF operates over thousands of millions of years, the sorptions or precipitations or some interactions just happened on the scale of the minutes to hours. So we need to capture this to identify the transient behavior, or we need to validate if the radionuclide interactions, absorptions is permanent or just connected control. So this reason we use a real-time experiment to look at these processes. So this example about what we did at the diamond lead source about barite precipitation is non-radioactive solutions. So we use the imaging and the diffractions mode to identify this precipitating process. So these XRD patterns tell us about the preferential growth plane of the barite. And also we can use it to characterize the concentration of their precipitation. And on the right-hand side, so there are the 3D images. We can see where the barite was precipitated in the pores. And so it's precipitated within the open pores or the closed pores. And it also helps us to calculate or quantify the diffusion coefficient, which can be used in the reactive transport modeling. So, okay, we generated the 3D images. But it can not only provide the quantification data, it also can help us to build the image-based reactive transport modeling. This is another example. So when we look at here, this is a 3D image. This is acid multi-joint interactions. So using these 3D images, we can look at the volume of the fractures is increased over time, and then I extracted one fracture zone to perform the reactive transport modeling. So the zone is circled in red. So here is reactive transport modeling. So it shows us how the acid flew through the fracture zones and how to exchange the surface roughness, and also in turn how the changes in the surface affect the acid transport. So this is just a short transport within about 500 minutes. But we could also extend this modeling into a long term, like over 100 years, over thousands of millions of years, to predict the mineral or the fluid transportation. Okay, so now we have used the multi-scale imaging approaches. We use the whole scale to look at the sedimentary phases, and we use millimeter scales to look at the sedimentary textures, and then we use the macro CT to look at the mineral surface, and nano CT to look at the pore conductivity. So we need to link them together. So this is a diagram to show how we link them together. The first of all, at the smallest scale, we look at how the radionuclides stick to the mineral surface. It's using the AFM or using the nano IR. And then we zoom out to look at how the radionuclide transports through the small pores or a little bit larger samples, and eventually across the whole underground layers. And so we use the different models or the different theories to understand how well the rock is hold up the radioactive waste. And by linking all these scales together, we can build a strong or evidence-based case that waste will safely contained underground over thousands of millions of years. And thank you.
Virginia, good timing. Any questions online, Kath? Or any questions in the room? Okay. Any in the room? Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, can I ask a really detailed question?
Very detailed. Okay, yeah.
You got the nice, yeah, it's that one.
This one.
Yeah.
It's pyrite, yeah.
Which rock is that?
This rock is my PhD rock. It's Cassington Mudstone. Yeah, Cassington.
So this is
No.
this is rhomboidal pyrite.
This from where the pyrite. This is euhedral pyrite. Yeah.
And what's the red part around the pyrite? Is that yeah? What you identified there, is that just different from pyrite?
No, that is the red part in this image is a pores. It's a pores around the pyrite. So we can see where the space kind of the mineral precipitate or the form in the pore space. And this is the intermineral pores. It's a pores between the minerals.
Okay.
And this is intramineral pores. It's pores within the mineral. Yeah, to show the difference.
Oh, so
This
actually,
is-
so it's interesting. Again, I guess you have rhomboidal pyrite, you always have some pore space.
Yes. Yeah, between each, yeah, each squares, yeah, crystals.
Oh, sorry. Find it.
Mark's got a question for David, which that's what the answer.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the right precipitation experiment that you had. What conditions are you doing there in the lab there?
So it's just the room temperature and the pressure.
And
So-
how fast did you say it was?
So after 2 hours, so we conducted the continuous scanning. So each scan took about 10 minutes. So after 2 hours, we saw the baryte precipitate.
And are you able to scale that to the conditions that you expect in steep environments?
Yes, that is what we are going to do is just, so now we conducted the experiment at the room temperature and pressure. Then we're going to move to the, like the real realistic geological disposal conditions, like the hand temperature and pressure.
And it's the last question, David. One more hand back there. Here.
Yeah, here actually, yeah, this is quite challenging one, challenging things to identify the different clays. But here, I try to identify the different clay minerals using the 3D images. So we can see this is elite and mixed clays, so which are formed within the pores, like the pore lining, the shape or morphologies. And this is bulkhead and the chloride because their reflectance or the density of the free value is different from the elite and standard. And this is the elite. I segmented this elite based on the pore lining morphologies. So this is the clays within the pores. This is the clays between the minerals. So it's kind of separated different minerals, clay minerals, but yeah. Still need more effort on it. Yeah. Yeah, we also need very high resolution techniques like TEM to scan the samples so we can see the individual clays, and we can also use she is an expert about the TEM. Sorry, just to give very general answer. So we can look at the planes, the clay planes, to identify the distance, kind of the distance. Yeah, to identify the different clay minerals, elite, smectite, or the chloride.